Anhills Part 3 by Aaron Braderman. The following day was spent living in what I can only begin to describe as all-encompassing fear. I quite simply just didn't know what to do. A part of me didn't believe the event of last night had truly happened at all, and had chalked it up to a bad dream. The other part of me thought I was crazy. Even the smallest part of my psyche that believed the ordeal last night had occurred didn't know what to do. So I did nothing. So for a long time I sat in my living room trying to watch TV through the bottom left peephole that was the only part of the device that still worked anymore. I wasn't even truly trying to watch TV. Most of my mental energy was spent scanning the corners of my vision for any sight of the creatures and trying to think of a plan. After a few hours of anxiety-filled torment, I pulled out my phone and began to look for apartment ads near me. Nothing, I thought to myself. To be more specific, nothing within my affordability. As I thought the word to myself, I quickly found my thoughts interrupted by a familiar voice. "Run if you wish. We will follow. You owe us a home," the voice spoke. I quickly scurried away from my couch and sat in the center of my living room floor as I attempted to make out the source of the voice. I felt my heart sink into the bottom of my stomach when I realized the voice was coming from all around me at once, as if my own walls were talking to me. Not knowing what to do, I went to lie down in the bathtub. Like the night before, I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion because the next thing I remember was waking up freezing from being in the tub for so long. For a while, I sat there contemplating what to do. I eventually pulled out my phone and called up Mitchell. "Alex, how are you, man?" he asked. "I heard about the accident you got into. I tried calling a couple days ago, but you must have not heard me or something." "I'm fine, Mitchell," I interrupted. "Thanks for the concern. Listen, I was wondering if you had any other exterminators you could call, or I don't know, just anybody else who might actually be willing to help me out." He said nothing at first. "Exterminator? You mean for that ant problem you said you were having?" After a few seconds of annoyed silence on my half, I spoke up. "Yeah, that ant problem. Listen, the guy you've been having see me hasn't really helped the problem at all. He says he could fumigate the apartment block, but I'd have to get people to fumigate." He interrupted, sounding very surprised. Whoa, slow down there, bud. Nobody's fumigating anything." "Look, I know it's an expensive process, and God forbid you actually help take care of your tenants, Mitchell, but I have a serious problem at my apartment, and your guy hasn't done shit for me," I yelled back at him. "My guy happens to be a very respected exterminator kid," he said, sounding very annoyed. "If he says we gotta fumigate, then by all means we'll fumigate, but not until you offer up some solid fucking evidence of an infestation." "What?" I asked. "I like to think I've been very patient with you in this entire situation, Alex, but I am done wasting the exterminator's time with routine checkups to your apartment," he said. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "What am I talking about? Kid, the guy didn't want to be rude to your face and say you didn't have a problem. The truth is, though, that the last 2 times he's been over there, he's called me back to complain about you wasting his time with an imaginary ant problem. He said that every time he's been over to your place, he's never found any ants or signs of them being there," he said. That's not," I began before stopping mid-sentence. "Alex, are you all right?" he asked softly. I hung up and set off to go talk to my neighbors. "Nope. Nope. Are you okay? You look terrible. Also, nope." These were essentially the answers I got from everyone in my apartment block. Not even my next-door neighbors said they had seen any signs of an ant infestation. The closest I got was one of the guys who lived 2 doors down saying he saw a few ants outside his house last week, but that was it. I didn't have the signatures I needed to get the fumigation approved. I didn't have anywhere to go. With no other options, I went back to my apartment and slowly sank into the couch. The way the living room lights illuminated my surroundings made my reflection very visible on the broken TV. The crack mark lay situated over the right side of my face. As I stared deeply into the TV, I found my eyes going fuzzy, as if I were staring off into the space between the TV. As I did this, I noticed the ants crawling up my legs from my reflection. Without ever once physically looking down at my body, I just stared straight ahead and watched them slowly swallow me up to my abdomen. It was as if I was disassociating from the world. The ants crawled even higher, never once stinging me, just slowly enveloping my body. They eventually stopped once they reached my shoulders. Without actually looking down, it was impossible to tell, but there had to be at least 1,000 of them on me. "We are your problem, not theirs." The ants all seemed to speak in unison. My fugue-like state was quickly broken and reality came crashing down onto me like an anvil from up high as I stood straight up and began to swat them all away. When they were all finally off of me, I stood there and watched them scatter in all directions to safety. Once they were all gone, the voice spoke from all directions yet again. "So be it." I clenched my one good hand into a fist and screamed out in a mixture of frustration, fear, and anger that all seemed to rise up at once. "Get out of my house!" I screamed before going to the kitchen to grab the hammer from under the sink. "Get the fuck out of here!" I yelled as I swung the hammer into the wall above my living room couch. "Where the fuck are you, you little demons? Get out!" I screamed as I swung my hammer from wall to wall. Occasionally, I would see a few of the ants in the holes I created before they would quickly scurry deeper into the walls to evade me. I attempted to hit them as soon as I saw them, but they were fast, and more often than not, my hammer missed the same spot and I would just end up leaving a fresh hole instead. How long this went on for, I honestly do not recall. I was locked in the jaws of anger and completely at its mercy. The only thing I wanted at that moment was the death of the ants who had tormented my life and invaded my sanctuary for far too long. I only stopped due to the pounding on my door. "What the fuck is going on in here?" My neighbor Ron yelled at me through the door, sounding very annoyed. "It sounds like a damn tornado over here." I placed the hammer on my table and opened the door. "Hey, Ron," I was quickly interrupted. "Don't you, hey, Ron, me. What the fuck is going on in this house? Sounded like you were trying to tackle your way through the damn wall." "I'm sorry," I began. "I was just trying to kill a few ants." He stared at me in disbelief for a few seconds before speaking. "Ants? Could have told me you were fighting a tiger in here. I'd have believed you too." I know, I'm sorry," I said, choked up with embarrassment. Ron's sudden arrival had completely snapped me out of my rage-filled haze, and as I looked to my left to survey my handiwork, I was now appalled by the scene I had created in my home. We stared at each other for a few more moments as I couldn't think of anything else to say other than feeble apologies. Eventually, I said the only thing I could think of. "Ron, you haven't seen any ants around your home, have you?" He looked over my shoulder, and judging from the widening of his eyes and the pale look on his face, it was safe to assume he could see what I had done, too. No, I haven't," he said, slowly backing up. "If I hear you going apeshit like that ever again, so help me, I will call the cops, Alex." With that, he backed up all the way into his apartment and left me there alone in the doorway. I slowly closed the door, took a few steps back into my living room, and dropped to my knees. As soon as I did so, my walls began to start murmuring. I once again decided to make a phone call. "Hello? Alex, is that you?" my boss asked. "What can I do for you? You're supposed to be resting." "Yeah, I know, I replied. "Listen, I know I still have about a week's worth of leave left, but do you think it would be okay if I came back to work early? I've been feeling really cooked up and I just really need to get out of this house and focus on something else." "Something other than what?" he asked. Something other than TV, I weakly replied. He took a deep breath and said, "Well, you know I'd never turn down help around the car wash, but unfortunately you coming back early would be a liability." "A liability?" I asked. The murmuring had grown louder. "Yeah, a liability," he reiterated. "The hospital said you need at least 2 weeks of rest. If I were to let you come back to work and you hurt yourself somehow, I'd be held accountable for it." "Sir, please let me come back." My eyes began to start watering. "I promise you I'll be extra careful. I'll do cash register duty, whatever else you think is safest. Just please let me come back early," I begged him. He replied, "I'm sorry, kid, but no can do. You enjoy your rest and I'll see you next week." "Wait," I said before being cut off by the click of him hanging up. I chucked the phone across the room and watched it shatter as it hit the kitchen wall, and slowly crawled backwards to rest my head against the front door. From where I was sitting, I could see a dozen ants or so devouring a half-eaten bag of chips on my kitchen table. With no more options at my disposal and a newfound sense of hopelessness, I ignored the ants and walked to my bedroom to go to sleep. What else was there to do? I didn't go to sleep that night. I just lay there flat on my bed, staring straight up at my ceiling. The murmuring in my walls had never ceased. It continued on and on for a couple of hours until eventually, all at once, it stopped. No more whispers or indistinguishable voices could be heard from all around me anymore. I took a deep breath and rolled over to face away from the wall and finally try to get some sleep. My plans were interrupted by the discovery of a single ant watching me from my nightstand. Almost instantly, I shot out of bed and stood up. After a few tense seconds, I spoke to it first. "I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry. I destroyed your home and I'm sorry." The ant said nothing, just stared back at me. "Say something," I shouted at it impatiently. "What do you want from me?" After a few more seconds of silence, the ant finally spoke. "You owe us a home, Alex." As soon as the words were spoken, the murmuring began again, only not from any of my walls this time, but from one clearly identifiable origin point. The voices were coming from my bed. As I made this discovery, I slowly opened my dresser drawer and pulled out my Leatherman pocket knife and one of my many cans of bug spray, and slowly approached the side of my bed. The ant on my dresser moved closer to inspect what I was doing, but said nothing. With the bug spray being held out in my damaged arm, I aimed it at the bed and slowly began to cut a hole in the side of my mattress. As the seams of it came apart, I was met with the discovery of a sea of black made up of hundreds of thousands of ants that began to rapidly dart away in all directions. I immediately recoiled in disgust, and as I dropped to the floor, I began to spray the poison wildly in front of me, desperate to kill the ants. My actions were quickly interrupted by a loud voice that spoke with more malice and hatred than I knew existed in the world. "You will not harm another nest." As the voice spoke, I felt the walls around me start to rumble. As they did so, the murmuring grew louder, and before I could even register what the voices were saying, a large black tentacle shot out of the hole I had cut into the side of the mattress. It lashed out at me like the finger of Satan himself, and as it swat across my chest, I was able to see that it wasn't a tentacle at all. It was hundreds of thousands of ants, all coalesced into a single tentacle-like shape. The tentacle writhed and swung wildly at me, but maintained its shape the entire time. As I lay there on the floor looking up in horror, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The ants were moving with a shared consciousness. Acting on instinct, I scrambled back onto one knee and began to douse the massive ants with my can of bug spray. This had seemingly no effect, however. Apart from a few dozen ants falling to the floor, the ants held their structure steady. After a few seconds of my retaliation, the tentacle quickly shot even further out of the mattress and began to grow and grow and grow. Never taking my finger off of the spray button, I simply fell back to the floor in horror as I watched the tentacle morph into an indistinguishable black tidal wave that began to envelop my entire field of vision, and soon after my legs. The stinging began almost immediately, and as the pain in my legs became so intense I felt like I was going to pass out, the murmuring turned to screaming. I wish I could recall what they were saying, I really do. At that moment, however, I was encompassed by a primal instinct that limited my mental capacity to one task: run. I rapidly began to scoot back, kicking my legs the entire time to get the ants off of me. The entire time, more ants poured out of my mattress and made the tidal wave of ants grow even higher and higher. As soon as I was able to get to my feet, I turned and ran for the door. As I did so, I could hear the collective ants behind me growing louder and louder. With one swift motion, I swung the door open, and as I stepped into the safety of my lit hallway, the voices reached their height in one last act of defiance. "Alex," they spoke before being cut off as I slammed the bedroom door shut. The second I did so, the voices immediately stopped. No more murmuring, no more rustling of the ants. It all simply stopped at once. I propped a chair against the bedroom door and hunkered down in my bathroom for the night. Which finally leads us here, the present. Ever since that night, I've been holding up in my kitchen. I've consolidated what remaining cans of bug spray remained in my home, and I've been sitting with my back to a corner of the wall for the last 3 days, waiting for the swarm to return. It hasn't yet, but I can't give them an opportunity to sneak up on me. I can't risk falling asleep and letting them get me. I can't risk them getting anyone else. These demons cannot be allowed to spread. I won't let them. As I've been writing this over the last hour, the gas valve on my stove has been running the entire time. I don't know if the ants know what I'm planning, but I do know that the murmuring has returned, and over the last hour it's been growing louder and louder. There's a lighter in my kitchen drawer, and as soon as I submit this story, I'm going to use it to destroy these creatures once and for all. There's a shared fire alarm system in my apartment block. I pulled it about 5 minutes ago and sincerely hope everyone within range has gotten out. I can't wait any longer. The feeling of eyes on my neck has returned, and even though I've grown immune to the paralyzing effect it had on me, I know what it means. The ants are watching me. They know what I'm planning and will surely try to stop me. I'm sorry. If there are any words of wisdom I have left in my tattered shell of a psyche, I doubt they would be of any worth. The only thing I can think of to impart onto you is this. We like to think we are the masters of our domain, but the sobering reality is that we are masters of nothing. The creatures that inhabited this earth before us will continue to do so long thereafter. Leave them be, and if you're lucky, they will do the same. And for the love of God, stay away from Anhills.